And welcome back to Chop for Time. In focus this week, at least that's what the hope is. I'm going to be setting down, actually already setting down, but through the magic of editing, you think I'm sitting here at the table by myself. But we're going to be talking about the message from this past Sunday, Ephesians chapter 6, verse 16, talking about the shield of faith.
I was going to ask how your weekend was, but this weekend has been an interesting one.
It has.
Yeah.
It has.
It's been strange.
We were talking this morning as we were sitting down over our initial cup of coffee that I think that the Halloween season, the All Hallows Eve and All Saints Day, it just delayed itself a week in the kind of the gremlin type activity.
Everything that could have gone wrong yesterday.
Pretty
went
much.
Wrong. Yeah,
pretty much from a tech standpoint. Yeah.
But in service, it was great.
Yeah.
And that's what matters.
We had a dead battery.
We did have a dead battery, but I mean, that's pretty minor.
Where am I going?
I don't know. I don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, I don't either.
But yeah, it was,
and so it continues.
Yeah, it was an interesting Sunday. I mean, so we had stuff going in the morning. In the evening, a Bible verse decided to leave the Bible for me. It just decided to not be there.
Yeah. That is like the worst feeling.
It was so bizarre.
As a teacher, as a pastor, as a minister, as anything that you're ready and you're waiting for this as you're reading, there's going to be this one thing. And sometimes it's happened to me. I've started too late or too early in a passage from what I really wanted to. And you're just like, where's it at?
Yeah.
Because you're reading and in the back of your head, you're going, where is this? Where is this? What's happening?
Yeah. So for a bit of context, last night with youth, we were talking about fasting. And there's a story in Matthew 17:21 where Jesus heals a demon-possessed boy. And in most translations, the whole passage, the chunk from verse 14 through 21 ends with Jesus saying, this type can only be driven out through prayer and fasting. So I had that ready, and I had it in my notes, and I had everything, and then I only had my phone Bible, which was NIV, and I pulled it up, and I start reading, and I get to the end of the passage, no phrase about prayer and fasting. It's just there. Gone. They just decided to cut it. And and it's not in this one either. So this is NIV. This is 2011
revision.
So yeah, they took it out in 2011. I don't know why. I want to do some more studying into that. But they do put it in a footnote to say that
it's echoed in Mark.
It's echoed in Mark's account of the same story. Yeah.
But for continuity's sake, you were really wanting to stay in the one gospel.
Yeah, all of my things are in Matthew.
Yeah.
I was so ready for it. I was reading through it confidently, and then I get to the end. And I'm like, where did it go? It was very, very bizarre. So that was fun.
Yeah.
But how was the rest of the weekend?
It was fine. My daughter, she's moved out. We've told everybody that, but she got a puppy. Yeah. An Australian Shepherd.
Very cute.
Yes.
Little puppy.
Yes, adorable little puppy. So, we were there with her on Saturday.
Very good.
With this milestone event in her life of becoming a proud dog mom. That took place on Saturday, and then just kind of spent the day, enjoyed a little bit of the sunshine, and then realized yesterday we do a couple little side cleaning things just to have something to do, basically. Yeah. And I realized yesterday morning that I was supposed to go do one of those Saturday evening. And the moment that I remembered it was Sunday morning. So I text and but it was good. It was just one of those weekends, man, I guess.
Yeah, it was something. But yeah, so we were talking about, we're still in Ephesians. We've just got a couple of weeks left, right?
Yeah.
Where are we? Here we go. Ephesians.
It's
before
that, yeah.
Here we go.
There you go.
Someday.
Getting there.
There it is. Ephesians 6, talking about the shield of faith.
Yes.
And you kind of opened up talking about actual shields, which we did the previous week with the sandals or the shoes, which was interesting. This giant, big, wooden, heavy beast of a thing.
Massive, yeah.
It's not some tiny little. I just bumped the microphone.
That's
tiny
fine,
little
yeah.
like circular
Yeah.
individual shield, but it's something to be used collectively to protect your neighbor.
Yeah,
as
yeah.
well.
Well, I mean, if you've, I wasn't about to show a clip of the movie 300, but if you've ever seen the movie 300, or really any time period, movies that's depicting war, battle, you've probably seen where they'll all come together and kind of lock shields. At this point in form, there's one, the front line is straight up. The next line comes in behind them, and they kind of go at an angle, almost like a 45 degree. And then the third line comes in behind them, and they go straight horizontal. Right. So, I mean, it's basically this somewhat impenetrable wall that they've built around themselves.
Which would definitely be beneficial for the second part of this verse, which is talking about flaming arrows and darts, which would be the ultimate defense for that is to make sure that you're covered in front and above.
Yes. Yep.
It's like an all-encompassing shield.
Right.
So explain a little bit about the flaming arrows of the evil one.
Yeah, you've got flaming arrows in the NIV translation. The ESV, which I read yesterday, was flaming darts. And while there's accuracy to those descriptions, they're really not completely accurate, because while there would have been general bow and arrow usage during the time, I don't know what a dart would have been considered back then, but it's not a dart of what we're thinking about now. Neither one of those were really what these shields were used to protect them against. It was spears, like 6 foot long flaming spears, basically. That could, if you didn't have
shoot that out of a bow.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's going to, you're going to have a big crossbow in order to fire those. But if you didn't have something to protect you against, they would come at such a speed with such force that it would not only take care of you, but anyone behind you, because it could impale several people at one time.
Right.
So it was very important to have proper protection against that, and that's really kind of what would have been the imagery and the lesson at the time for the people that at the church at Ephesus and the surrounding churches. This is a circulating letter. That's what they would have taken it as.
Yeah, and yesterday you kind of went through a multitude of different passages and verses as your definition of faith, so to speak. Right. Rather than writing a whole explanation, you went through multiple different areas in the Bible and let it speak for itself, which is cool. Yeah. Do you want to list those real quick?
We started off with basically what is it? Hebrews 11:1. It's the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And one thing that I didn't mention that, going back, I wish I would have, but we'll mention it here, and I'll just say it was intentionally chopped for time, is that when we're looking at faith, because we talked about there's all different types of directions that you can go with faith from a biblical perspective, from the amount, because we've seen little faith, much faith, more faith, never seen this much faith, but really in any area of faith, our faith is only as strong as the object that we're placing it in. So faith is not something, it's not our faith being strong. It's our trust almost in God. So it's not what we can produce, but it's about what we're placing the faith in. That's what determines the level of the strength of our faith. So we talked about that a little bit, about how it's helping not only us, but others. And then we went into, okay, if we're going to go with this, the context here, extinguishing all the fire darts, what does it protect us from? In a spiritual warfare sense, which is what Paul is still writing about. We talked about 3 that I mentioned yesterday morning. There's many more, but fear, doubt, and despair. And I think those kind of build on each other. I think that the entryway into despair is fear. And I think that our fear, going unchecked, unchallenged, lends its way, serves as a gateway into doubt. And then doubt, whenever we find ourselves in a situation that causes fear, that leads us into doubt, doubt that's not taken care of will lead us into despair. So yeah, we took a lot of scripture and I said, hey, instead of my opinion on defining fear, doubt, and despair, and the remedy to that, let's look at what the Bible speaks about it. And the list of scripture here, Romans 15:13, Isaiah 26:3, Psalm 56:3, Isaiah 41:10, Hebrews 13:5. That was fear. Then we move into the doubt section of it, Isaiah 46:4, Philippians 1:21, Philippians 1:6, 1 John 1:9, and then you get into the despair portion of it. You start looking at Romans 8:33 and 34, Philippians 4:19, and then we read the entirety of Psalm 42.
So the Bible talks about these things.
And that's just a very small sampling. It could have been a much greater length during that section.
One thing we talked about earlier on in the week about faith when we were meeting with James, our upcoming preaching intern.
Yes.
Who'll hopefully be joining us on these at some point.
Yeah, we need to produce like a theatrical trailer or something.
Yeah.
Coming soon.
Coming soon. Yeah, that'd be funny.
To a YouTube channel near you.
Yeah, we were talking about like whether or not faith can exist without doubt. Do you know what I mean? Like because faith is different from knowing that something is physically in front of you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, I don't need to have faith that there is water in this cup.
Right.
Because I know it.
Right.
It's like, how do we define the difference between faith in something? It's like, I have faith that this is good for me.
Yeah.
But that's not something physically tangible that I can know for absolute fact. But I know it for, like, I have absolute faith that water is good for me.
Yeah.
Like, is the same sort of thing true of our faith in God?
Yeah, and I think if I remember correctly, during the process of this conversation, the enlightenment moment for me, or the illustration that made the most sense to me in the doubt, without doubt there is no faith. I get it.
Right.
But going to a physical representation, like you were talking about the water, we can see that there's water in this cup. We can taste when there's water in this cup. I think that I have never doubted once in my life that I can remember that there was air for me to breathe.
Yeah, which you brought up.
Right. That we can't see it, and we see the evidence of it. We see when it's blowing. Right. We see leaves, we see trees, we see flags, we feel it when it's blowing, but we cannot tangibly see it. But it's beneficial for us.
Right.
It has to exist, or we wouldn't exist.
Right.
And I think from a spiritual standpoint, the faith is the same way.
Yeah.
I don't know that doubt has to be present in order for my faith to exist. So I get the premise, and I understand it. Yeah. I think that our moments of battling doubt and being victorious through Christ in our moments of doubt, that helps to strengthen our faith.
Big faith building moments.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. But I don't know that there has to be that. And again, I admitted yesterday, I'm not the most intelligent person in the world. I get that. I'm not. Yeah.
But yeah, it is an interesting one, because obviously we don't want to embrace doubt. Even though doubt, despair, and what was the last one?
Fear, doubt, and despair, yeah.
Those three things, like you said, once overcome, are huge faith-building things. But we shouldn't embrace them just because they have potential to be faith-building.
Right. It's almost kind of like embracing a victimhood mentality.
Yeah.
That if we embrace that fear, doubt, and despair has to be present before faith can exist, then we start focusing and looking more for the moments of fear, doubt, and despair than what we look for the moments of faith.
Yeah, no, that's good. One strange thing that I'm only noticing now that I probably should have done more research into, but I remember when we did a spiritual warfare or a spiritual beings study with the youth, One of the words that comes up a lot is the word fiery or flaming when describing certain beings, and always to do with spiritual beings. So you have the likes of the seraphim, which are the burning ones, or the stuff like that, and then the seraph meaning snake. It's interesting that he uses the term flaming arrows, because it can also often be translated, the word seraph meaning snake can sometimes be translated as like a venomous or poisonous snake, much like what we see in Genesis 3. We have a snake that, causes doubt in the eyes of Adam and Eve, and ultimately has this result of causing a toxic thing called sin to spread through the world. And it's just a nice little, I like the flaming is kind of thrown back in there, of this, like the weapons of the enemy are toxic and fiery and devastating.
Yeah, and there's this indication of every example that you just listed there, and the fiery darts, that unless you're able to extinguish them, there are lasting ramifications and effects after the initial strike. The danger of a venomous snake is not... The danger isn't done once... With the bite. It's the after effects of what's injected.
Right.
After. It's the doubt. Yeah. The sin is the lingering, most damaging effect. Yeah. So I think that we have to view our spiritual warfare not only from the immediate strike. I mean, those are dangerous, no doubt. But the long-term effects are what affect us most. And again, that doubt, unchecked, unchallenged, leads to despair. Fear, doubt, despair. All of these things left unchallenged, and if they're not addressed, then ultimately we'll wind up in our demise. Yeah,
and we can see that even in things like marriage, which obviously Paul talked about in the previous chapter. The exact same thing is true within a marital context. If you let doubt or lack of trust go unchecked within any relationship, in the moment it doesn't seem all that dangerous, but again in the long run it can be so destructive. That's interesting. So when it came to things chopped, what other things got removed?
A lot of the different elements of faith that we see throughout Scripture, even though I made reference to it, the fact of little faith, Jesus, right. O ye of little faith, and then the Roman centurion.
It's Matthew 17, which is where my verse got cut out of.
Which disappears from certain Bibles. But then, the Roman guard with whose son was sick, Jesus' response was, "I've not seen a greater faith than this in all Jerusalem." And then, we're instructed.
What a compliment.
Yeah, right? So, I mean, just the different levels of faith, the different things that we've seen people put faith in Scripture. Again, we could go back to Peter walking on the water, because our focus determines our faith. Yeah. That's really what we're focusing on, is what we're putting and placing our faith in. Yeah. And that's why you hear almost weekly from our messages, and even in the times that we talk here, our perspective and our focus is one of the most important things in our lives. Yeah. Because whatever you're focusing on is really what you're going to produce. And if it's a situation that incites fear, as with Peter, when he looked down at the craziness that was going on at foot level, and he started to sink into that. Yeah. But when his focus was ahead on Christ and not focusing on external things and anything else, then he was sustained and moving towards Christ. Yeah. And while it's a little bit symbolic, if you look at when Jacob was deceived by his father-in-law, trying to marry the right daughter, one of the things that took place was they put, he was promised to have all of the speckled sheep that he could have once he worked his term, and his father-in-law gave him nothing but spotless sheep. And Jacob took an almond branch, and he cut chunks out of it, and he laid it in front of the food trough, which is not only the place that they would feed, but it was also the place that they would reproduce. And they produced spotted and speckled offspring, which he got to take with him, which would be symbolic of the fact that whatever we're focusing on is what we reproduce. Right. So that was an element of faith that really wasn't fitting contextually here because
still
this
interesting.
It is. It's very
What we
interesting.
put our faith in, and we kind of see that with the entire books of Kings and Chronicles.
Yeah.
You know, like
Yeah.
the people are like, "Well, we want a king." And God's like, "I'm your king." And he's like, "Yeah, but we want a human one." And he's like, "Okay." And then it just goes awful. It just turns everything turns to carnage because they keep focusing on this human individual.
Yeah. And long term, how many good kings did they wind up with? Just a handful.
You compared to the 40 or something that were accounted for in the books.
He did evil in the sight of the Lord.
It's crazy. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Faith is such an interesting thing. One of my favorite stories about faith is the story of the disabled guy who gets lowered through the ceiling. Yeah. And it's such a bizarre phrase, but she says, because of the faith of your friends.
Right.
Like,
yeah, and that's another one of those avenues that you could go down with faith. Because you hear all the time, healing, miracles, anything that's beyond our own capabilities. There has to be an element of faith. There's no arguing that. Every biblical account, there's an element of faith. But whose faith? In some instances, it's your faith has made you whole. Mm-hmm. In that instance, it was the faith of his friends. Right. How much faith did Lazarus have? He was dead, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, he was resurrected. So it couldn't have been his faith.
Right.
It was the faith of the one that resurrected him. Mm-hmm. So whenever we try to formulate these things, that's when, there's just so many different branches and little nuances of this talk of faith.
Mm-hmm. But that all goes in with what you're talking about, the analogy of the shields being something to cover not just yourself, but your neighbor, and your neighbor not covering just themselves, but you as well. Is that like faith has power based on the one that it's in, that your faith is in, like when we're praying for people, when we're praying on behalf of others who are in need, like our faith is very important as to who we're setting our focus on, who we're praying to, all those kinds of things are very important. Like in that Matthew 17 passage, the whole faith the size of a mustard seed, which is a very small amount, can tell a mountain to jump into the ocean, or move from here to there, whatever it is. So clearly faith is a important aspect of our lives, if not the most important. I mean, Paul says it's by grace you've been saved through faith.
Through faith.
And
that's what each one of these items we've tied back into an earlier description of theology that Paul's written, and that's Ephesians 2:8, where he's talking about that it's through faith,
right?
By grace,
which is a gift.
Through faith, which is a gift. Yeah,
very cool. That's one other thing that I do find interesting is that it does, it talks about the gift of faith. Mm-hmm. Like the fact that we are able to believe and have faith in Jesus is a gift in and of itself.
Which means that there's zero capability of us to produce it for ourselves.
Right. Yeah.
We can strengthen it, but we can't produce it.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, any other areas that you want to touch on before we close up?
I think that's
very cool. Where are we going next week?
Helmet of salvation. So that'll be that's going to be fun. I kind of started studying towards that because again, we're talking about salvation here. That's an
important one.
An important one, but we have to remember we're still in protective armor. Yeah, all of these items so far have been protection mechanisms. So we have to view salvation, the helmet of salvation, from what does it protect and how does it protect?
Yeah. Cool.
Spoiler alert, it protects our minds.
Right.
Yeah. So that's what we'll be looking at.
Very cool. Well, thank you for joining us. We'll be diving back into this next week. And if you are willing to, please like and subscribe and chime in again next week for more Chop for Time.
We now have an animal following on our YouTube channel. Did you know this?
We have an animal following?
Yeah, a dog. He was mesmerized with our Chop for Time.
I think you meant like some subscriber that is like
No, I'm not. I don't speak in that kind of code.
Okay.
I'm talking to like a literal. Trish
Yes.
Bramwell, if you're watching this, her dog loves Chop for Time. So
You said for 18 solid minutes was sitting watching?
at least that was the last update that I got, maybe more. So
That's
thank
impressive.
you.
That's impressive. That's more than most people probably watch.
More than me. I can't follow myself for 18 minutes. Are you kidding?
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us, and we'll be back again next week.
See you guys.